Looking at the country that Nnamdi Azikiwe was actually part of those people that get the independent, and he was the one again on the other side. He was taking side on the Biafra side.
What's the question? What's the question?
Oh, the question is this: was there any time was that Nnamdi Azikiwe was trying to make peace within the northern soldier Gowon and Ojukwu? Was there any time, or he just came and suddenly take side and say, okay, we just want to go with Biafra?
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Let's be careful with history. Things are not that straightforward. Azikiwe is not Ojukwu's father, and sadly, he was not respected in the East, even back then. So the idea of him mediating and calling both of them together, that would not happen. It did not even happen. Not like it will not happen, because even in I read something there from something called the Eastern Consultative Forum. If you really want to know a little bit more about that thing, please read the book by Elechi Amadi, Sunset in Biafra. It was a rubber stamp assembly for Ojukwu and his minions. Nobody really cared about what Azikiwe had to say. They just wanted him to say yes to everything Ojukwu said. Is he that kind of person that will be able to now stand up? The only person who could speak sense into Ojukwu, as far as politicians went back then, was Awolowo. And he did try. Of course he did. How do I know? Because I have the minutes of the meeting. The minutes of the meeting are in this book. Awu on the Nigerian Civil War. We'll get to this book at some point. Ojukwu was just somebody who didn't care for whatever. Like, you could tell him anything, he wouldn't listen. And I'm not going to blame Azikiwe for that, because you have to also be careful not to just say, oh, he was a bad man, let's make him bad. He's not. He has his issues, but as far as this is concerned, there was nothing he could have done. It was, as a matter of fact, the only reason that he couldn't do much. By the way, let's remember also that it wasn't just from his presidency straight to Yakubu Gowon. There was Ironsi. When Ironsi was in government, Azikiwe was in the East. Now there the coup meet him. You see, he got back to Nigeria. Ironsi was president, was head of state. Azikiwe went back to the East. It was while he was in the East that the coup started, that the second coup, July counter coup, happened. The coup meet time for East, so it was in the East. All the war meet time for East. So nobody say it was just one man just say I'm in London. I mean, when he was wrong, we talked about it. He went to hide, saying he was going on a boat cruise to the Caribbean. Then later he went to the UK, and then he was there. He knew about the coup. We knew all of those things. We talked about it. But when it comes to the issue of Ojukwu, that's not on Azikiwe. It was on Ojukwu. I can't blame Azikiwe. He's not his father. But I hope that answers the question. Let's quickly move on. What happened to Azikiwe? Somebody asked that question yesterday, so I answered, but I went to read again, and then I found something that I'm going to add today. It's in the book by Ken Sarawiwa. So I'll read from On a Darkling Plain, because somebody just wrote Azikiwe there again. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was in his country house at Nsukka. One hardly saw him. He was meant, I believe, to be in disgrace. Since Ojukwu's arrival in Enugu, he had made an unmistakable attempt to disgrace Azikiwe, whose popularity definitely stood in the way of Ojukwu's political ambitions. First, he had him moved from the chancellorship of the university. Then he attacked the Simi side of Azikiwe's connections with the university. Next, he organized a systematic harassment of Azikiwe's finances, attempting the collection of debts owed by Dr. Azikiwe to agencies of the Eastern Nigerian government. These actions were not calculated to endear him to Dr. Azikiwe, who, as all men, valued not only his personal property and wealth, but also his contribution to Nsukka University. The climax to the disagreement came when Ojukwu declared publicly, apropos the university, that he was not going to be deterred by the bleating of an old goat. In respect of certain innovations he had proposed for the institution. You know who the goat is, according to Ojukwu. If you cannot respect Azikiwe, I mean, with all his faults, he was still another statesman from that region. Anyway, let's continue. If you cannot respect him, I don't know what else, man. So he says he was not going to be deterred by the bleating of an old goat. in respect of certain innovations he had proposed for the institution. The goat is a symbol of foolishness in eastern Nigeria. The insult in the remark was stinging. With the events of July 1966, some had hoped that the breach between Ojukwu and some old politicians might be healed. Dr. Okpara had been released from detention where his beard had turned grey, and Dr. Azikiwe appointed into the Consultative Assembly. Dr. Okpara returned to favor and was often seen in public by the side of Ojukwu. Dr. Azikiwe, however, probably made his final mistake when at the crucial October meeting of the Consultative Assembly, he argued that the East might well accept the creation of states in the region. He was loudly booed, and is said to have left the assembly in disgrace. Booed or not, Dr. Azikiwe had given mature political advice based on his political experience and his interpretation of the political weather vane at the time. Thereafter, he retired to his country house at Nsukka. The truth is, it was the same Azikiwe who was against the creation of states for many years. It was actually quite sad that all of this was going on. Just a little more before we go back to that book. The university at Nsukka was at that time under the leadership of Professor Ojukwu, who was not a particular friend of Dr. Azikiwe either. They had had their disagreement in the early 50s during the crisis in the Eastern House of Assembly, when Dr. Ojukwu was one of the so-called sit-tight ministers eventually dismissed by Dr. Azikiwe. Dr. Azikiwe had, it is said, referred to Ojukwu as the moon-headed doctor of leaves, because the botanist apparently, oh boy, referred to Ojukwu as the moon-headed doctor of leaves, a banter which the bald Ojukwu, a botanist, was not likely to forget. Oh boy. Nsukka students, being in a militant mood and having taken to Ojukwu's interpretation of Azikiwe's role in the affairs of the university, as well as to their distaste for his role in the 1964 federal elections, were not in sympathy with Dr. Azikiwe. By the way, they also have a history going back to 64, when it was said that Ojukwu had approached Azikiwe in order to organize a coup, and some say that Azikiwe said no. That was in 64. This is 66. So he says, Nsukka students, being in a militant mood and having taken to Ojukwu's interpretation of Azikiwe's role in the affairs of the university, which by the way he founded though, as well as their distaste for his role in the 1964 federal elections, were not in sympathy with Dr. Azikiwe either. He must have been a very lonely man at Nsukka. A number of us, graduate assistants as well as students, were his tenants there. I saw him but once, when we came to appeal for silence. It did not make much of an impact on the noisemakers, who were wont to shout their defiance of the Federation of Nigeria at the top of their voices. This is sad. I feel very bad for Dr. Azikiwe after doing all of those things. By the way, this is 1966. At this point, he's already 62 years old. Ojukwu, that is moving mad, was in his 30s. No respect. Even if you don't even agree with him, this one is too bad now. Even students could not even respect. He was a president. It's crazy. As well as students were his tenants there. I saw him but once when he came to appeal for silence. He came to appeal for silence in his own house. He did not make much of an impact on the noisemakers, who were wont to shout the defiance of the Federation of Nigeria at the top of their voices. So even he could not even control students. It gets worse, by the way. There's a document we're not reading today about what happened with the Zikis movement, when members began to decide what they were going to do with the Zikis movement, and even Zik himself had to leave the movement. By the time he returned, they didn't listen to him. They were even going to change the name to something else. Some people just said, just leave it as Zikism. It's not so different from what might happen to Peter Obi the way he's going, because he's not the one leading the people, they're leading him. That's the danger of populist movements, by the way.